Welcome to Talking Event Driven. My name is Chris van Vlaanderen, co-founder of Simo and Kanika. And I have been designing and talking about event-driven systems for many years now. This is actually quite a big moment as this is our very first podcast. And together with my co-hosts Wout and Brian, we will be releasing a new podcast every 2 to 3 weeks, where we will invite guests that have something interesting to say about event-driven architecture. The goal of this podcast is to cover all aspects, from experiences in the field to architecture and development to new products. So we're very glad we can kick off this series with Perry Krol, Head of Solutions Engineering at Confluent. I still remember my first call with Perry, where we had a small question about integrating Kafka and SAP, and where we ended up talking about a lot of different aspects related to these kind of integrations. That's actually when we realized that it would be perfect to have Perry as our first guest for our podcast. I hope you enjoy this podcast and learn something about integrating SAP into an event-driven architecture. Have fun.
Welcome to Talking Event Driven, the podcast about the world of event-driven architecture. You will hear seasoned professionals sharing invaluable insights about their challenges and experiences in event-driven architecture.
Okay, welcome to the podcast Talking Event Driven. Today I have Perry Krol with me. Welcome, Perry.
Well, thank you, Chris, and welcome yourself, I guess.
Yeah, thank you. Perry, could you tell us a little bit more about your background? Why we invited you as a guest? Maybe especially related to integrating SAP and Kafka.
Right. Yeah. So I joined Confluent about 6 years, well, just over 6 years ago in 2018, and as a solution engineer, we call that, but a pre-sales architect helping out customers to take the tools and figure out what problems they can solve with it. And I joined in Germany, and very quickly we got in touch with all kind of customers that want to do stuff with their ERP data, which mainly was SAP. And over the last and then I kept on running into it and dig more into it. And in the last year, I actually changed my role to become dedicated on the topic of integrating event-driven on an event-driven way with SAP ERP applications mainly.
Yeah. Okay. Very interesting. And that was because you indicated yourself, okay, this is really my domain of interest, or is it something you said, okay, I want to learn more about, or I want to share my experience. I see that many people are asking for this, that the market is growing.
Yes, I think there's a few things coming together always like this. So when you're in the field role, you always have this little balance, like having a lot of things to do and how much time do I have to focus. And I'm a curious person, so if you either go very broad or you go deeper. And then the other thing is that just the requests about it became more and more beyond the German region in which I work. And I started to join colleagues on calls when they were talking to the customers, because it was such a new area for them with so many new technologies and abbreviations and things they were using. And I liked doing that. But of course, it then started to become a little bit tight from a time planning perspective, right?
I can imagine.
And then the other thing really is it really takes off at the moment over the last year and a half, 2 years, as customers in the SAP world are going to major transformation initiatives as they're moving to S/4HANA. And because that transformation is so impactful, they're also reconsidering and reviewing their integration strategies and their integration technologies. And even some of them needs to be upgraded because of end of life of technologies they're using today. So
Yeah.
these things came together. And then the other thing is Confluent a year and a half ago announced a strategic go-to-market partnership around DataSphere, the cloud-based analytics platform. And then within the company, people started, hey, we need to think about how this works. And then I got in these calls involved. So it's a little bit three things coming together.
Yeah. Okay. Great. Great. Um, so you've done quite a lot of projects at customers with event-driven systems. I was wondering, did you encounter some key challenges and pitfalls there? Is there something you can share with us that the points of attention?
Yeah, well, there's a lot of things, right? So if I really start thinking about event-driven integration, I'm doing that since 2001 when I joined a company called Tipco. And one of my first customers did a lot of order to delivery across multiple applications, the core being SAP, and started doing that using messaging to decouple the integration. And then from there, I started to get a little bit more into the specific APIs and capabilities for integration with SAP. And then I joined Confluent, as we said, 6 years ago. And it turned out Confluent, in the Kafka world, there were not really application level integration capabilities. There were like no connectors for it. So the way that people start looking at it, hey, it's just data, so let's go to the database. Yeah. And then two things happen, right? If you want to get data into an ERP system, going straight to the database is a very, very bad thing because there's all this business logic that should validate the data and updates more tables than you want to know. So that is just the wrong approach. And I know that, but because before I got really in integration, I was myself an implementation consultant in ERP. And we fundamentally said, okay, going straight to the database is like signing your death sentence, right? So that is one of the things that I think. And then the other thing really is for getting data out of, in an event-driven way of the database, that kind of works. But the data model of the SAP system is very cryptic. So there's a long legacy in how it's been evolved. And most tables and columns are like, they seem to have a legacy all the way back to the mainframe. Because there are abbreviations, and then the abbreviations are in German. So it's very hard to understand the business semantics of these. And that then makes it a little bit complex, right? Because you get the data out of the database, you put them per table in a Kafka topic. And now somebody needs to put them together in the business object you want to look at, like a sales order, a purchase order, or a delivery note. And most of the data engineers or the integration engineers working with Kafka and feeling comfortable with Kafka don't understand that data model, of course, and don't have the semantics knowledge. So that's like a big trap. Then the other thing is really about, is Kafka a messaging layer that brings data from one place to another and supports a application-centric integration approach? Or because Kafka, what traditional messaging systems don't do, right? Traditional messaging systems are really good at routing data from a producer to the interested consumers in a very efficient way. But once delivered, their job is done and that data is gone. One of the big advantages of Kafka is that you can have that data being stored. So it can become a kind of an event store, which really is helpful when people want to also consume that data at a later point, even consumers that may not exist. And that becomes very interesting when people building, let's say, all kind of applications with microservices. You don't know which microservice might need that data tomorrow. But then you really start about sharing the data. And then it's really important that we decouple the system from evolution of the data types. Because if something changes in the SAP world, I don't want to have all the different microservices having to upgrade at the same time. And then that whole schema thing that we have in the Kafka world becomes super important to support this kind of evolution. And if you then look at the most capabilities that initially were capable of publishing data from into Kafka topics, these didn't support things like schema registry. So now then very quickly you get to the notion that you're moving the data around, but then you leave it to every consumer to figure out, to deal with the structure and to parse that. So these are kind of things that make life hard.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, yeah, I think I can definitely relate to that. It's not only SAP, it's always, especially when you buy a system and you need to get these events out of the system, and you need to be able to convert them to a language that the business understands, that's not specific for the system. That's always a challenge, right? So that's an important one. And indeed, having the storage on Kafka really helped us, because you have state on Kafka which you can use to aggregate data and have more meaningful data in the events coming from the system. Now, how would you say, what would be a good approach for getting this data out? What did you see? Okay, this is my first go-to when I need to get events out of SAP, and I would like to have, I'm going to make it a little bit harder even. I would like to have really nice business events expressing the business language, and if possible, even maybe different small business events expressing really what happened in the system, because that's, of course, the flexibility that you would like to have as a consumer to really know what happened. Is there some kind of architecture that you really like?
Well, this one I really like. So the first thing is identifying where does SAP itself have on the application levels internal triggers, so the event triggers that you can get to. And what was interesting that in the first year that I worked for Confluent, around after a year, one of our customers organized a hackathon, and they really wanted to think about some event-driven integration patterns, and they brought us in. There were some Salesforce in there. There were people from SAP in there. And there was also a partner from SAP in there called Asapio. And they already had an event-driven plugin that you install as an SAP ABAP component in the SAP system. And what that could do is it's SAP for a long, long time already has internal events on business object changes that supports the business workflow in SAP. Originally you think, right, somebody creates a requisition, and then a manager needs to approve that before it can become a purchase order, and these kind of things. So these kind of in-application workflows. So these are already between different business objects, and that already SAP created this whole notion of these internal business workflows, and they drive that through business object repository events, typically known as change pointers. And what Asapio had done, they had built a framework that could listen to those as triggers, and then you could you could enrich them, and then you could publish them out to other systems. And initially, they built this for integrating Ariba with the ERP after the Ariba acquisition. And over time, they started to integrate this with more and more different systems, including messaging systems, and especially in cloud. And through that hackathon, actually, they built also then a way to integrate it with Kafka and with Confluent. Now, there is some limitations and restrictions there, because they built this in ABAP, and ABAP doesn't have a native Kafka client. And it doesn't have access in ABAP to all the low-level details of the TCP/IP stack. So they decided to go for HTTP. And, Confluent having a REST proxy to enable HTTP clients to produce and consume in Kafka. That's the road we took. And I really like that. And then the last years, if more and more customers are moving to S/4HANA, SAP itself started to add native eventing in S/4HANA. They call that business events. And the whole idea is that on the new virtual data model called Core Data Services, there's predefined events, and there is a portal from SAP called api.sap.com where you'll find other public APIs for the ERP system, but also events. And so there's a whole set of predefined events. The interesting thing about the business events is that they are more granular than the business object repository events we had in the past. In the past, the business object repository events really say something changed in the sales order, something changed in the purchase order. But and then you could, okay, let's trigger on that. But you have to do extra steps to figure out what changed, and then you have to do extra steps to figure out, is this the one I'm interested in or not? And I think what business events does really nice is having way more, let's say, milestones, something that can represent a milestone in a business process. That is the trigger. So more fine-grained triggers, and you know fundamentally already from the trigger what has changed. The other thing then that what they did in S4 is they enabled outbound events through messaging out of the box through the ability to configure channels. Unfortunately, they restrict that to their own BTP-based messaging services called Event Mesh and Advanced Event Mesh. But the other thing that they really did is that the events they send become notification events because they say, yes, this event happened. This is the ID of the object on which it happened. And then send it out, which is a good trigger, but it doesn't carry any state. It doesn't carry any data. So the first step you need to do, take that ID and collect the data from SAP. And there's two different things now happening, right? So we have the event outside of SAP. The people in the integration team may not be the SAP people understanding the data model. So if they enrich the data from the exposed REST APIs, fine, but then they're fundamentally bound to what is exposed through those APIs and may not be 100% fitting for what you want to expose. And the other thing is the time it takes between the event happens and I'm enriching the data because it goes externally and then I query it. There might be multiple events happening, and then the payload you get, the data you get, may not be the same one representing the event. So what Asapio have been doing is start working on, can we start using the business events triggers as an event, but can we then, through their design payload designer, enable people to build the payloads we like and send and enrich the data before we send it out. So this is a pattern that I very much like, because it enables SAP integration people in a common environment to build those data products and take the data from the application and represent it in the semantics that the business teams can do. It's not the only one, right? So we also have you also can just use now there's a whole set of Kafka Connect connectors that really understand different APIs from SAP and can do metadata inspection and generate schemas and everything, which will be typically you use if the main people to drive the integration will be the Kafka experts versus the SAP expert. And that is a little for me the question, who should be doing this, right? Is this a responsibility for the integration team, for the enterprise integration team? And then SAP is just one application, or should this be by dedicated SAP integration experts who understand the business context of SAP?
Yeah, that's actually a really good question, because that's probably the SAP team that wants to make sure that everything related to their business context is done by the team itself, and they don't need help from outside there. So if I understand correctly, with Asapio is now adding more and more functionality to add this state to these business events to make sure that you can do everything with the Asapio plugin, and that you wouldn't need stateful streaming on Kafka itself to aggregate the data anymore, right? Or you could combine.
Yeah, you could. Well, number one, you can combine, right? So there's two things. Yeah. But one of the nice things indeed that Asapio does, so it gets a trigger, you then enrich the data, but then it packages the data into the business object. So you're no longer getting data in topics on a table per table basis. You fundamentally get a single payload representing a sales order, a purchase order, or a delivery note in a single JSON message. So you don't need to correlate them together anymore and build that business object yourself. So that's one of the big advantages for sure. And the other advantage then is if it's done by SAP, people in an SAP environment, they don't have to learn real new tools. So that's the other, I think, big advantage there. Yeah.
Okay.
And then also the thing they're really looking at, so they're doing this already for a long time, but what they're looking at is getting we keep on supporting the BOR events, I would say, but also these more fine granular events that are used by business events. And that makes it more useful for quicker saying, I don't want to get every change to the sales order out. I want to get the changes out where the delivery schedule changes or where the delivery address changes, which are completely different parts of the sales orders. And then having more specific events so that you already, when you publish your data, you already make it easier for other applications to decide where they want to subscribe to, instead of getting one topic for changes to sales orders, and then they need to do the filtering. Yeah, it's a change on the sales order, but not on the part that is relevant to me.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, very interesting. Nice. I had another question about the other way around, because we've been talking now about data, getting data out of SAP, getting fine business events triggering external business processes. But of course, there's also a lot of data that needs to come in to SAP from external systems. Let's say if you have an external CRM system, for example, and you need to get the customers into SAP. What would you advise there?
Yeah, that's super interesting, right? So if you look at the eventing capability out of the box from SAP, they're really focused on eventing out. Now, in the latest, like this year, they started to add in the business events, inbound business events, but these are just like, yes, here's a business, but they missed the event handler. So they say, yes, if you push something to this channel and use this specification, you can use this specification, fine. But how it then gets handled is say, that then goes to an ABAP developer that maps it out then to internally. So it's definitely a way to go. I don't think it's the best one. So there we really start to look at connectors that can integrate with standard integration APIs that SAP supports. And iDocs is the traditional one, right? There's definitely something to say for iDocs because it's not real time at that moment. So that you need to figure out from a business context, how real time should real time be? But if you can give iDocs and then SAP can schedule them, then they can consider their own load is generated. The first thing, of course, where you think about is web services, right? And SAP exposed a whole set of web services. And what used to be all being BAPIs and RFCs are fundamentally now exposed under REST APIs. So there are Kafka connectors that work and discover the structures of the OData APIs and then say, okay, if I get a message from in a Kafka topic that I can map one-to-one to that API specification, he sends them out and then gets them back right. And so that works from a connectivity perspective. Now, of course, for me, always a thing between things like iDocs versus the REST APIs are two things, right? The one is, let's say, but REST APIs use the outside system starts to determine the load that pushes on and the priority it sets for the ERP system. So that might be something you want to discuss with the administrator of the SAP system. Where with iDocs, it's fundamentally more scheduling thing that I have more control of. Now, the other thing is, if I have iDocs, that data is just persistence in SAP before it's going to be processed. So if something fails through the application integration framework, you can fundamentally find out what was wrong. You can fix those errors and do a retrial of these individual records. What happens when you send in something over a stateless REST API? It goes right or it doesn't go right. And how do you then do the exception handling if it doesn't go right? And then think about if you think in data streams. So if these are there are certain things that can only happen in a specific order. So what happens if you were not able to create the sales order? Or things like but you're shipping stuff and now you get the shipment notification. Well, you cannot relate it to the sales order because it wasn't there, right? So now you also need to have all the other business objects, making sure that I understand, or that the dependent event now also needs to be kind of queued up until we got the thing going. And that is not going to be handled by SAP. That now is going to be the part of the people building that in the integration platform.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Very interesting. We had a case exactly like that. We don't have experience at Simo yet with really processing, having the business logic into SAP, having the SAP consultants deal with the difference from the business language into the language that SAP uses. But we did it indeed externally, and then used the APIs. And because you use the API, you have the advantage that okay, if something fails, you get a response, and you can, from the outside, react on that. So that's what we did in that case. Indeed, we said, okay, if it fails, we put it on a retry topic on Kafka, and we keep track of the key. So if something else goes in, and we know that something is not processed yet, we also put it on the retry topic, and we make sure that no events get processed that we know that can't get processed because the target system is not ready yet. So that's nice indeed to range out of the system and keep track of those things. It doesn't make it easier, of course, but it's inherent to any external system. Basically, it's not only SAP related. It's any system that has an HTTP endpoint, it can always fail. So you need to be ready for that.
Yes, and I think if you take traditional REST APIs, all that exception handling is expected to be implemented by the client, right?
Yeah.
And then sometimes you have business process interactions where it's not even the client, the client application that's responsible for the whole context. So what if you got like the CRM trying to do something to the ERP, and then there is like a manufacturing execution system that tries to do something against the ERP in the context of the same process? Now you need to start thinking about, okay, but where is that process state and the dependencies? And that's where you start looking at, okay, do we do that? How do we orchestrate? And then I think the statefulness of Kafka, that it can really store the data and then keep on correlating with later events happens, is really a way to think about implementing that in that middleware layer. That doesn't make it simple, like you say, right? Because it's just a complex problem. But it defines a clear place where it could live because it is connected to all the other systems, right? That is the middle part, which is stateful. So that is super interesting thing to look at. And we're looking at similar things on the outbound, which really is I get data out of SAP. I want to expose it as a business data document. Initially, it's ungoverned. How do I take it governed? What are the different governance qualifications I want to put onto it? And there you also want to think with those kind of gateways, right? The gateways get it in Kafka so we don't lose it, and then start pre-processing it before we officially make it available for other people. So there will be private topics or ungoverned topics, and there will be public topics from which people understand what the trustworthiness of that data is, and that should support a higher decoupling between development teams.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah. Okay, I think we've done quite a lot of talking about integration inwards and outwards of SAP. Maybe to finish the podcast, I'm very curious. What do you think is the future of SAP and Kafka? What are emerging trends, technologies that you think that will play a significant role in the future?
Yeah, so I think there's a few things happening, right? So one thing is really that eventing. So SAP is, of course, also on a journey to be even more and more cloud ready and cloud native, or make it easy and more, and support customers in the cloud journeys. So they're standardizing on a set of cloud friendly protocols and interfaces. And a big part of that will be APIs, web services, and that makes perfect sense. But I also have been seeing that you cannot, well, there are use cases where you don't want to have that synchronous waiting and that load. So eventing is becoming a bigger part, and you see that really also. So events was first really the business events as a trigger, but I've been adding already to their extension programming model called RESTful Application Programming Model. They've been adding the ability to do more with events and to create derived events on the triggers with payloads, and now they start building those event handlers. So that's kind of interesting. On the other hand, you'll see that there is also the event-driven integration for more analytical systems, right? So not from one application to another application, but from the SAP to data warehouses, data lakes, and lake houses. And traditionally, most customers have been doing that by getting stuff straight out of the database. And once you're in the cloud, that database is no longer accessible for you. So what SAP is doing is they created this virtual data model called data services, and now start adding their abilities to annotate certain objects that then actually do no real-time CDC type of updates sending out to an external system. And that's the way they integrate with a new DataSphere product. And that can also be used to get things in like the Snowflakes and Databricks of the world. And the thing there again is, there's two things that are happening there. So traditionally, if you use like database level change data captures, then you really get the raw data in the data model of SAP straight into your data lake. So that means that the data engineer in a data lake now needs to understand the semantics that are from the application that are not represented in the underlying data model. So also here, there's much more thinking about shifting to the left, you could say. So because what people do in their analytics platform is they're turning the raw data from the operational systems into high quality data products. And now it's about moving that to the left and start thinking about who would be better person to expose the data in a semantically better representation to the business of that data than the application, well, the database model of the application. And so that's something we're very much looking into. And that's also something that with SAP it goes up, and we believe we have a good role to play there. So getting because the other thing what you see is that people are moving from data lakes to lake houses. Really what it means is I'm getting faster, I'm accelerating the time that I'm ingesting data, that I can query it for business reporting. So people are moving workloads for which they use data warehouses more and more to the lake house because it should have that data more readily available. And there is also say, okay, but then we should be able to build out and populate these models of these systems in near real time, because it's less and less for business intelligence use cases. Also, we can't wait anymore for a day to look at what's going on in business. It doesn't have to be real time, but it has to be in the next 15 minutes, half an hour at least, right? Or maybe in an hour, but not any longer like I can wait for the batch from yesterday. So that's where we see a lot of stuff coming. And then we say, okay, if you do that, how is it different from the exposing SAP data for operational integration use cases? And on the one hand, it's similar. On the other hand, it's different actually, because if you do it for the analytics use cases, what you're interested in is having a replica of the business document on any change, because you want to be able to report on it independent of what. So, but if you want to create it for specific events that should trigger a reaction in a specific area of the business, like logistics, like manufacturing or finance, these are all different ones, right? Should I send up the whole business document? Because business documents are big in SAP, right? Because they link those business domains together. And should it be better that you can create specific data products for specific use cases? And then they should all be based on the same base data, but then maybe I have different projections of that same data product to better suit different use cases. And that is then something where the owner of that data, and that would be nicer, though the owner of the data is probably from the system of SAP. So if I create these data product owners there, then they can figure out what is the right portfolio of data products for these business objects. And that is a big difference, right? Because like I said, I was in the enterprise application integration and ESB world from, let's say, 2000 till 2015. And we talked all about the common data model. And the common data model is like, let's define the unified model for integration for each business object across all applications, so everybody maps to it. But these do precisely this. They come from top down and try to have one representation for everything, for all the applications, which means that every use case needs to look to the whole complete structure and makes it just hard for mapping and figuring out what you do. And by pushing that ownership to data product owners instead of to enterprise architects, the data product owners, they can think about what's the right portfolio, just like a product manager would be at any business, right? I mean, in the car manufacturing world, they don't create one model. They have different models, even if they're reusing technical same components, because they address different market segments. And that is a thing that is really starting to capture some traction and fits really well with streaming and taking the SAP world and bridging that also to the digital world. These worlds have been, for the last 10 years, kind of next to each other, and because the data people don't understand the business process, and the business process people around the ERP, they want to understand, get to the data, but okay. But we have our application view. And then so through this kind of concepts, we start to find a way to bridge those kind of worlds. And then also you're going to get much better. You get new use cases and things. So what I see in manufacturing, for instance, is there's big digitalization projects around factories, and they optimize all that IoT data to capture there about optimizing the factory, optimizing the machines and the equipment and all that. But if you can contextualize some of that IoT data with data from the business process, you understand who impacts it. If we have something we didn't expect, okay, that's bad for the factory, but it has a cascading effect on this customer or on this thing, on this quality. And then you can create these, you get the real value out of the data. And then you need to start thinking, oh, but that means when the IoT data exists, I can already start enriching it with business context it relates to. So in the business warehouse, in my data lakes, I can build these semantical models that already have what in a normal single database would be the foreign key constraints, right? But in an analytical model, you don't have foreign keys because you get data sets out of different databases. So you build a semantic model. And if you can already simplify the semantic model by doing some of that enrichment in the streaming platform, then I think you on both sides gain a lot.
Yeah. Wow, very interesting. So actually, my key takeaway here is having better data quality from the start. Shifting left is actually what's most promising for the future, and making sure that your data is understandable for everybody in your business opens up a lot of possibilities, and then you can really get the maximal value out of all the new technologies that are popping up.
Yes, yeah. And then you can also start leveraging the power of data and start thinking in data already in your operational process, instead of saying, no, I'm dumping my data to the analytics world, the data analytics world, and then I figure out how to get value out of this. If we can bridge those two worlds, then I think we add really more agility and faster time to value on the data side, and we offload the business systems, because most of the integration currently done is very much application focused, right? I move it from the process from A to B to C, which is good, and it's still a use case where it's very efficient. But in some use cases, it's better to have the data being driving this thing, and then event-driven from a data perspective should be thinking about the data quality perspective and the scale at which you want to share that data beyond your own domain.
Yeah, okay, nice. I can see that you're very passionate about about all that evolution. Yeah.
Yes, I'm a curious little guy, and
Yeah.
and just going from A to B and say, what happens if I do A plus B, and then what happens if we add C, and then building bigger pictures, and then of course every time we do that, we make 2 steps forward and have some dissolution and make 1 step back. But hey, we also still net made a step forward. So it's not going to be magic. It's going to be hard work, but I think I'm strongly convinced that that the cycle, because these things are cycles, but they're not the same cycles. They're cycles that moving forward on an axis. So it's improved cycles, right? That it's some of the concepts that we did before in a slightly different way, which have a completely different impact. And that's how we actually progress in the world.
Yeah. Okay. I think we have a very, very nice conclusion here for our podcast. I would like to thank you, Perry, for joining this first podcast. It's been really, really nice talking to you.
Well, thanks, Chris. It has been a great honor for me to be part of the podcast. And like you said, I'm really passionate about it. So, hey, I can talk another hour about this. But I'm really happy to talk you and to be the host of the guest in your podcast, and really think about what event-driven can do more than moving bits and bytes around.
Thanks for tuning in to another episode of Talking Event Driven. We hope you enjoyed the insights and stories shared by our incredible guests as much as we did. If you found value in today's discussion, don't forget to subscribe, rate, and leave us a review. Stay tuned for more enlightening conversations. Until next time, keep innovating and stay event-driven.